Welcome back. This is the second video in the series on creating an MVC project in Visual Studio 2019. In the last video we discussed the basics of creating our first project and a little bit about the routing and how the views work with the controllers. Before we start with the main topic for this video, I'd like to just have a little bit more of a look into the routing as we discussed last time. So I'll go into the program. So as you remember in the last video, this is a home controller and it displays the various views which are in this folder just here through the use of these get methods that are in the controller. However, I did show you as well that if you don't put any arguments into the browser, then it's automatically going to show us these default controllers, and I'll show you why that is. If you have a look down on the right hand side here, you'll see a file which is called startup, and in the startup we define how the program's got to run, and this includes what we call the routing. And that's this bit down at the bottom here. Here is just defining an object which is the main route, and it's the default route, and it uses the template which is a controller equals home with the action of index and then an optional ID. So the first thing it's going to look for is the controller, and if it doesn't find a controller specified, it's going to take this home controller. That's why it automatically goes into there. And if there's no action specified, it will automatically take this index. Don't worry about the ID at the moment. That's an optional thing that can be added in. That's why it's got the question mark behind it. But again, I'm not going to go too deep into this at the moment. This is C# stuff which I might do in another video, but at the moment, just bear in mind that that's why it automatically routes there. You could of course change this to anything you wanted it to be and it would set it as a default. It's really not very recommended to do that. It's better to change your home controller and the index and the views of what you want to appear on that screen. However, it's perfectly acceptable to do so. It's just bear in mind that you could mess things up if you go changing things in this bit. It's far better to do it in the other bits. So, going on with the next part of what I want to talk about, and that's actually creating views. So far we have this one view that we've been looking at. We've also got the privacy. So when you press play, this is what appears on the screen. This is basic HTML. It is styled using Bootstrap as I discussed before, but it is basic HTML which is displaying on the screen. So we're going to create another view. We'll create it inside the home folder. So what I want you to do is right click on the home folder, go on to add, and just simply click on view. Okay. Here you'll see a template for creating views. At the moment we're not going to be using the model. When we come into making our database functions, I'll explain this a bit further, then we will be using the model. But for the moment we're just going to make a view, and we'll call this view hello, or anything you want to call it for that matter. You'll see also down here there's some options that we can use. Create a partial view. I'm not going to go into that too much, but what we can do with a partial view is create a whole load of partial views which then we say to a page, display this partial view. You might think that sounds strange to create a partial view, but where it really comes into its own is because if you remember me talking about these being CS HTML pages, not just HTML pages. So within that we can specify in C# that if something happens, then display this partial view. If something else happens, then display another partial view. So we're not really limited to just saying one thing. However, we can also use that within the controllers itself, which is a more usual way of using it, but partials can be very useful. Not for what we're doing at the moment, but just so you're aware of it. Also, you'll see here, use a layout page. We can specify a different layout to use, but we are just going to use a standard layout page, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about layouts in this video. But for the moment, create your view with a name hello or whatever you like to call it, as long as you follow along with the same steps I'm doing. Really, any name works, but it will affect how we call things in the controller. Empty without model, and then just click on add. And you'll see what it's saying here is scaffolding. The basics of what that means is it's just checking that all the dependencies and everything else works within the project itself, and the project knows where to look for things. It's quite a clever system this. It's actually going to generate some code for us within that view. You see the first thing that it creates is something called a view data and the title. And the title equals hello. This is all Razor and C# things, and it's to do with what's on the layout page, just to tell the top bar what we're going to call a page. So at the moment it's going to be hello. We could call it anything we want. We're just going to leave it as it is for the moment. And you'll see that it's displayed a H1 with hello. So now if we go into play, so this is the first index page that you saw before that we created, and we changed it to hello whoever. So just to recap on what we said before, this is located within the home controller, and it is the index page. That's the full address of it, but because we use the default routing that I showed you just a minute ago, it automatically found it, so we didn't need to put that in, but that's the correct path to get it. So it goes to the home controller, looks for the index method, and wherever the method displays, it looks for the view that's matching that and displays it. So now, if we change this to the view hello that we've just made, maybe you expect it to go there, but I'll show you what happens. So it doesn't actually find it, even though we've just created the view. Now the reason for this is that even though we've created the view, this isn't looking for the view. This is going to the home controller and looking for the method that's called hello, which will eventually display the view. So we shouldn't expect it to be able to find it at the moment, because we haven't told it where to find it. So we're going to go out of this again and back to here, and now we're going to go to our home controller and we're going to tell it where to find that view. So just like the index here and the privacy, we're going to create a new get method underneath there. You can just copy and paste the top one there and change the names. I think it's always good practice to type them in afresh when you're getting started. Doesn't save time, but it does eventually. So this is going to be a public method. I'm not going to go into access modifiers in this series at all. This is C# stuff, but just know that that means that it can be accessed from anywhere within the project. That's what we want for this. And we're going to make an iAction result. The good thing about Visual Studio is that it's got IntelliSense, which will tell us all these sorts of things. So you type in the I and it gives you iAction result. Then, if you remember what we called that, we called it hello. For naming conventions within this, it's is always a method's always going to start with an uppercase. Then what comes after that is these things here. And as you see, it automatically goes down. Now, at the moment, this is saying to us there's something wrong. And that's because an iAction result wants something as a result, sending back to it. That can be a variety of things, but for the simplistic way that we're looking at it here, it's just looking for a return statement. So it's wanting, when we search for this method and we go into this method through this controller, send me something back. So what we're going to be doing is return, just like above, view. And what that's going to do is when you search for this, it returns the view that matches this name within the home controller. And in the home folder in the views, there is a page that matches the name hello. So it will look for that and send it back. So we'll just save that and we'll run it. So now we're going to go in. First of all, home index is what we expect it to be. And last time when we typed hello into there, a quick point that case doesn't matter for this, so lowercase is absolutely fine. Last time we went to home, which is a controller, then the method hello, there wasn't a method that was hello even though we'd already created the view. Now there is. So when we click there, you'll see it goes to hello. A great thing about this as well is even though we're already running the program, with the CSHTML pages, just like any other HTML page, we can actually change things while it's still running and then just refresh the page. So I can, for example, put in another, I'll put in a H2 down here. And we'll just say, this is my first view page, and save that. Now if we open it up again down here in hello, and refresh the page, and you'll see that has appeared next to it. So that is the basics of creating a view. We can do that throughout any way we like. There are certain conventions that we do normally use when creating any kind of web apps. But for the moment, just know that if we want to create a view, I'll stop this. We're going to create a view down here in the views section, and then we need to create something in a controller that corresponds to that view. So the controller looks for the folder that is called the same as the controller minus the controller. So home looks for the home folder, then it looks for a view that is matching the method that it finds in the controller. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the layout page that I mentioned earlier. And we find that in the shared place down here. Now for anyone familiar with HTML, this will look a little bit more normal, should I say. That we have the basic setup of any HTML document. So we have a HTML doc type, the head, the body down here. We also have a footer. We have the scripts that we're using in this. So we're using some jQuery libraries in here. We also are using some jQuery stuff which is going to be setting up the for the bootstrap things down here. There's also a script that we're using here which is a JS site here. I'll go into that a little bit later, but that's where we can put our own JavaScript stuff in. It's just here, but we'll go into that a little bit later. Going to the top now, we've got the style sheets that we're using. Again, it's very similar to the scripts at the bottom that we've got. First of all, the bootstrap, which is all stored in here as well, and then a link to the style sheet, which it has created for us automatically. And again, you'll find this in here, and it's under site. As with most HTML pages, it's a good idea to put your own custom stuff at the bottom of any things like the bootstrap and such like, because then it will prioritize what's at the bottom first. So it'll first of all look for this stuff, and then it'll override it with the stuff that we type in ourselves if is necessary. That's a standard way of doing things with HTML. In this MVC template, it does it for you automatically, so it's pretty good. Now then, on that index page earlier, we saw the navbar, and that appears on every page. And that is all because of this layout document here. Again, in the startup and all our things here, we tell it to look for this layout document and include it on every page that we make. There is ways of saying to it, I don't want to use this layout, I would like to use a different layout, or I'd like to use no layout whatsoever. But this is the standard way of doing things. And so all the things you see that are set up automatically, that's in the layout. So when creating a good site, a good app, you would first of all set up your things within your layout in the way you want it to be, the things that are going to display on every screen. It gives you a few to get going with, which is the index and the privacy here, and that in the navbar there, the first MVC project, and it gives you some stuff at the footer down here. You would generally change quite a lot of this yourself. As a template, it gives you quite a lot to start with. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to just go a little bit into how to add items to the navbar, especially the thing that we've just created, which is the hello, and I'm going to show you two different ways of making that. So I'll leave these in place as they are at the moment for the home and the privacy policy, but what we're going to do is just create another one underneath. So I'm just going to create another li item, which for anybody who doesn't know HTML very well, this is just a list item, and basically we're going to copy what's above. We're going to be making it the class equal to nav item, and this is a bootstrap class. If you remember me saying that bootstrap is automatically included within MVC, that doesn't mean to say that you couldn't decide you want to change it and use something else altogether, use a different framework altogether, or not use a framework at all if you really chose to. It's just the one that comes standard because it is kind of industry standard at the moment, although that's starting to change now. So here in the style sheets, this is where it links to it. So if you did want to change all of this, you could do. At the moment, I'd say when you're first starting, leave it as it is, learn it as it is, and then when you get a bit more confident with stuff and using different frameworks, feel free to go ahead and change it then. But for the moment, we're going to be using this navbar item that's there. So we're going to make an A link, just like up here. For the purposes of this, I'm actually just going to copy this across. As I said before, I'm not really going to be explaining Bootstrap to you in this series at all. If anybody would like to learn a bit more about Bootstrap and would like me to make a video on that, please let me know in the comments, and I'll be more than happy to make a video on Bootstrap. Anybody who is familiar with Bootstrap 3 will see that this has actually changed the way that it displays things in the navbar. It used to look very different. It used to have things like navbar inverse and navbar default. Navbar default's now changed to navbar light, and the text as well has changed the names slightly. I actually much prefer the way number 4 works, but there is a bit of a learning curve with it. Again, don't worry about this stuff at the moment. If anybody does want me to make a video on it, then that's fine. I'm going to take out this ASP area at the moment. First of all, in fact, what I'm going to do is just delete everything here up to the A tag, and oops, just make sure that's finished there. And we're going to put in there hello. For you that know HTML, you'll know that at the moment this isn't going to go anywhere because I haven't specified where it's going to go. I just wanted to explain the two different ways. There's actually more than this, but when it comes to Razor, but the two different ways of doing it and why we would use them. So the first one that I think most people who've just learnt straight HTML are familiar with is this href method. Now this can be used exactly the same as it would in any other program, except what we're looking for is that the first one is going to find the controller and the second one is going to find the method, just like we had before. If we want to use this, we want to be making sure that we do put a slash first, and then it will go to the root, and then it will look for the controller within that. So we want to go and go home, and then hello. And if I have done this right, it should go to it. So we'll start the project up. Now you'll see alongside the home and the privacy we've also got one which is called hello, and when we click on it, as expected, it goes to home and hello, that page that we just created. I'm going to go close this down again. The reason I'm not going to be using the href in this is because in Visual Studio in this MVC they've put some methods in that just make things a little bit clearer and make sure that you're approaching things in the right ways. Sometimes this can get a little bit confusing for people. I mean, because I could use, for example, dot and that to get to the same thing, and that just looks in a root. It goes one step above, then starts looking. If I, for example, missed that out altogether, it would struggle to find it. Because we're not specifying go to the root first and then search all the items. There's many different sort of practices for doing that, and it's very useful, works great. However, there is a slightly better way of doing that when it comes to these bits, and that is with these bits. This is really strongly typed, so it just avoids any confusion, both for the person who's trying to read this stuff and for the person who's making it, that you don't accidentally do typos because it's so strongly typed. So the controller we're going to be looking for is the home controller, and then the action, that's the method we're looking for. Again, we've got IntelliSense that helps us out a lot here. It's hello. So if we save that and run it, we should get exactly the same result as we just did, but this way it's just a lot clearer. So you'll see the hello is there still, and we click on it and we get to where we should expect the hello page that we created already. As you could probably see, we could actually access this from any page. We could make a button down on the index page to actually get to it that way, which I'll just do briefly here. I'm going to use, I think I'll just use an A tag again. In fact, what I'm going to do, just to make things a little bit quicker here, I'm just going to copy that across, except we're going to change some of the classes. Okay, so all I've done there is just changed it to a different bootstrap button. So even though this is a link tag, which you would normally see just as a word that is a different colour and changes and is underlined and such like, this is actually going to change it into what looks like a button, even though it works exactly the same as the A tag by just using the BTN. The BTN primary is just telling it what colour we want it to be. We could make it a variety of colours, so I'll show you that in a moment. But now if we go into the index, now you'll see there's a button in the center of the page there which is called hello. When we click on it, we go to that place. I'm going to go back into the index while it's still running. Just to show you a little bit about this, we can change the color of it, success, and the style of it even, whatever we want to do with it, but I'll just leave it at that for the moment. Again, I'm not going to go into Bootstrap too much on this, but just to give you a bit of an idea. Refresh the page, now you'll see it's the color success as defined in Bootstrap. And that takes us there as well. There's all variety of manner of different ways to get to that page. The important takeaway from all of this is about the routing. That we've used strongly typed controller as home, the action as home. That this is because we've created a view which is called hello, and that lives within the home controller and in the home folder in the views, and we created an action, a method, and it's a get method to access that by just returning the view. Okay, so that kind of wraps up this video now. So far we've learnt the very basics of how to create some views, how to customize it a little bit. So far we've only talked about the controllers and the views. That is a really important part in it. Next we're going to go a little bit deeper and we're going to talk about the models, and we're going to start making a database. For those who don't know much about backend, for any kind of persistent data we really need to be using a database. There's other ways of doing things like with sessions and stuff, but I'm not going to go into that at all. Within this series, it is only meant as a very basic thing, but we're going to go into that a little bit and code first. I'll talk about what code first is all about and show you an example of how to do it, and we're going to create a basic database. We're also going to talk about some of the conventions within it, such as a CRUD convention, which is create, read, update and destroy. That's quite a normal one that you're going to use, and I'm going to show you some really cool things that Visual Studio can do to automatically create these things for you. It's not always what you want, but as a very basic model you can start a very good project just from getting Visual Studio to create these things for you. I always think that it's great that Visual Studio can create them for you, but you really need to understand how it goes about doing that. And what sits in the back of it all, because otherwise it's just a matter of getting things to do things for you automatically. It's far better to understand it all, and that you could create it by yourself if you needed to, but then realizing that probably the easiest way a lot of the time and the most effective way is to get Visual Studio to do a lot of this stuff for you and then customize from within that, just like we have with the template and the layout and the index there. So thanks for watching. I'll see you next time, and as usual, like, subscribe and share it, shout it from the rooftops, go into the street, tell a random person about this video if you like it, and if you don't, feel free to put a thumbs down on it as well, because for Google Analytics it means exactly the same as a thumbs up, so go ahead. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.